Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I call this one Say Goodbye to the American Dream. I'm going to devote the entire time we have on this Wolff Responds to an article sent in by one of you. His name is Bill, and he'll know who I'm talking about. And I want to thank him for sending me an article I had not seen. And I want to tell you about it because every now and then an article comes across my desk that really captures a very important point and does the homework of presenting it clearly, assembling an enormous array of statistics to back it up and to show the evidence, and then pulls it all together to demonstrate why it is we have to say goodbye to the American dream for those of us who still imagined it was around. So the author's name is Ben Norton, and his article is called "The United States is Not a Wealthy Country." Not anymore. And you can find it at geopoliticaleconomy.com. All one word, geopoliticaleconomy.com. It was an article that he published there about the middle of August of this year. So let's begin. We begin with the statistic that an awful lot of people look at to measure the wealth of a country. And Ben Norton wants us to understand why that number is the wrong one to look at. And I'm going to work that out with you right now. So he takes the total output of goods and services, the so-called GDP, gross domestic product, and he divides it by the number of people in the United States to get the average wealth per person. And it is impressive. $696,000. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. If you take the reported total wealth of the United States and you divide it by the number of people here, it works out to just shy of $700,000 for each person. Let me drive home to you what that means. If you've ever heard someone say to you, "Wow, what a different country it would be if we just divided the wealth equally. We didn't allow some people to have billions and or nowadays with Elon Musk, $1 trillion, and other people have next to nothing. If we divided it up for starters equally, we would all, each of us, you and me, 700 grand each. Might be a different life if we had that, wouldn't it?" But that's not what I'm talking about today. What Ben Norton did in his article is he said, how does that stack up among the other 30 richest countries in the world? Western Europe, North America, Japan, a few others. The richest 30. Well, we come in second. If you take the GDP and you divide it by all the Americans, it works out that we rank number 2. And then Ben Norton does something every good statistician knows to do. He asks about another measure, not the average, but something called the median. What's the median? It's that amount of money which just splits the population of the country in two. Half of all Americans make less than that, and half of all Americans make more than that number. What is the median of the United States? Wow, here's the numbers, folks. $69,000. In other words, the average is 10 times larger than the median. Wow. How does the United States stack up on the median among the 30 richest countries? Remember, on the average, the United States is number 2. On the median, out of 30, the United States ranks a generally stinky 28. Wow, near the bottom. What does that mean? The answer is very simple. A tiny fraction of our people have an enormous amount of money. So when you include them in the average, it gets nice and high. Elon Musk is the possessor of hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth. So he's in the average. But he's one person with hundreds of billions. Wow. That means on the other side of the average are lots of other people. To get a sense of how people group, the median is really much more interesting. The median tells you half of all Americans have less wealth than $69,000. Those people are in trouble because that's not enough wealth to have an adequately passable life. $69,000 won't get you 2 years of college in the United States today. But I want to go through some of the other statistics that drive home this overwhelmingly central point. The United States has become one of the most unequal economies in the world. And because of that, the American dream, that idea developed across the 20th century, that we all in America are in the middle. Yeah, a few people at the top. Yes, a few poor souls at the bottom, but we're all kind of in the middle. That was never true, but we got a little bit in that direction after World War II, in the 50s and 60s and 70s of the last century. But starting at the end of this last century and throughout the 26 years of this century, this country has become more and more and more unequal, requiring more and more and more of us to say goodbye to the American dream. So let's now look at the evidence. Okay, let's begin. We're going to deal with the bottom half of the American people to start with, because once you understand where they're at, you will understand what has happened. Take the total wealth of the United States, trillions and trillions of dollars worth of wealth, and answer the question, what percentage, what share of that total wealth is owned by the bottom half of the American people? That's 160, 170 million people, the bottom half. Together they own less than 0.5% of that wealth. Let me say it again so it sinks in. The bottom half of our country together, all of them together, all 170 million, own less than, together, 0.5% of the wealth. In contrast, at the other end, the 19 richest households in America, 19 out of 330, 340 million Americans, the top 19 households together gather into their hands each year 1/7 of the total income earned in this country. 19 households get that in. All right. I know this is hard to keep in your head, but you're beginning to get the idea. How do we stack up against the other 30 countries that are rich? I already told you. When it comes to inequality, we are the worst. We are right up there, neck and neck with one or two other countries for the worst inequality of all. And you know what that means? It means that the majority of our people live under conditions worse than the majorities in those other countries. Oh, sure, the world's first trillionaire is an American, but that's not you. You're not a trillionaire. You're not going to be a trillionaire or a billionaire or a millionaire, because the overwhelmingly vast majority of Americans never get there. They try, they work hard, they play by the rules, they go to school, they study, but they never get there. Because the only way to get to the top is to inherit the money from somebody who's already at the top. At least that's how most of them get there. So you see what your chances are. Don't feel bad. They're really poor, because that's what this country is now, really poor. Let me give you some more evidence. Here's a statistic that Ben Norton goes over, and I want you to think about. Statistics or statisticians have added up who does the consumption in this country. Who accounts for all of the food, all of the clothing, all of the house, the rental and the home ownership? Who buys goods and services each year? And then they ask the question, are these rich people or poor people? Here we go. The 10% richest Americans, 10%, they account for, here we go, get ready, half of all consumption in America. Is half of everything purchased is purchased by the 10% at the top. 1 out of 10 Americans account for 50% of everything purchased. The remaining 90%, that includes you and me, we all struggle about what portion of the other half of output we can consume. The 90% are given half of what there is to consume, because the other half is taken by the richest 10%. Of course you don't have the American dream. As George Carlin used to say, the reason they call it the American dream is because you have to be asleep to believe it. That's Ben Norton's message in this important article. He has many more statistics. I really urge you, if you have the time and the interest, to go to geopoliticaleconomy.com, find that article, and read it. But here's another one. He asks, quite rightly, has it always been so in the United States? And he presents us with evidence, including a beautifully done graph, that proves that it wasn't. It shows how there was inequality throughout American history. If the slogans that brought America out of its role as a colony of Great Britain back in the 18th century had something to do with liberty, equality, justice for all, the equality part we never got, ever. But the level of inequality remained relatively low until the year 2000, and even more until the year 2010-15. Then the inequality took off. And you know what that means? That no one in America, no political leader, is as responsible for the deepening inequality of the United States as is Donald J. Trump. Is he the only one? No. Did Biden contribute? Yeah. Did Bush? Did Clinton? Did Obama? Yeah, they all contributed. And on behalf of Americans deprived of the American dream, we should thank them all. But those are the leaders who presided over the worst burst of inequality in the history of the United States. All of that is shown crystal clearly in Ben Norton's article. If you felt that life is getting harder in the United States for most people, you're right. If your mother and father told you such things, they were right too. When your politicians or your leaders told you how good our economy is, they were wrong. They were talking right through, well, I won't be impolite. That's the reality. The American dream has been taken away. You're not going to get any of the promised benefits. The most recent, at the end of the last century, was the demand of the American working class to have access to colleges and universities, something that, until the 1950s, had been a luxury reserved for the already rich people to make sure their children got the education that would give them the preferred jobs when they graduated. And the working class demanded, we want college education that's been denied to working people, the vast majority. And in a few years, every one of our states, all 50 of them, took little agricultural colleges that had existed for farmers and transformed them into the great state universities that we now take for granted in every one of the 50 states, and created the state universities and the community colleges to give the working class what it had been denied. And what do we see now? Over the last few years, a decline. Somewhere between 50 and 100 colleges gone. 53,000 college students told, get lost. Only half of them found another place. The other half interrupted their college education halfway through, and all they have to show is not a degree, just the tens of thousands of debt that they borrowed to get an education that was then taken away from them. We live in a terribly unequal society. And the article by Ben Norton, once again, geopoliticaleconomy.com, find it, read it. It's full of many more statistics than I have been able to present here to show you how extreme this situation is. We're not the greatest country in the world, the way the politicians try to end every speech. They wish it. I wish it too. But it is not the truth. To believe that is to be in that dream that you have to be asleep to believe in. And the first step, as you all know, of overcoming a situation like this is admitting that that's how it is. If interventions like this strike you as useful, please share this video with your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers. That's why we produce them, to enable you to do that. And of course, if you can help us cover the financial costs of doing it, we would be grateful. Just go to our website, democracyatwork.info, and that'll show you how to do that. And in any case, thank you.